She was 8 months pregnant, standing on her own front porch, in the rain, in her socks. The door behind her was locked. Her husband was inside, and he was not coming to open it. She had walked into her kitchen 30 minutes earlier and found another woman sitting at her counter, wearing her robe, drinking her coffee, comfortable,
sign here, Clara.
unhurried, like she belonged there. Her husband looked at Clara and said 5 words that told her everything she needed to know about the past 4 years of her marriage. He said, "You were not supposed to be home." Not, "I am sorry." Not, "This is not what it looks like." Not even her name. You were not supposed to be home. So she walked to her car, in the storm, barefoot, 8 months pregnant, with nothing but her phone and her dignity. And what Donovan Whitfield did not know, what he could not have imagined in his worst nightmare, was that the woman he had just thrown out into the rain was the controlling shareholder of a $50 billion empire. He had spent 4 years married to one of the most powerful women in the country, and he had no idea. Stay with us, because what happens next is not just about money. It is not just about justice. It is about a woman who spent years making herself small enough to be loved. And the night she finally stopped. Lesson statement. Some people will only see your value after they have lost you, but the real story, the one that matters, is the moment you finally see it yourself. Meaning of the story. This is not a story about revenge. It is a story about reclamation, about a woman who had everything: wealth, intelligence, power, grace, and chose, for years, to keep it hidden because she wanted to be chosen for who she was rather than what she owned. It is about the specific loneliness of being underestimated by someone who was supposed to know you best. And it is about the moment, quiet, undramatic, inevitable, when a woman stops waiting for someone else to recognize her worth and simply walks into the fullness of her own life. If you have ever made yourself smaller to keep a piece that was not worth keeping, this story is for you. If Clara's story moved you, if any part of it felt like something you have lived or something you needed to hear today, take 3 seconds right now. Hit the like button. It tells us this kind of story matters to you. Leave a comment below. Tell us, what was the moment in this story that hit you hardest? We read every single one. Share this with one woman in your life who needs to hear it today. You know who she is. And if you are new here, welcome. We tell stories about women who find their way back to themselves. Subscribe so you never miss one. We will see you in the next story.
Rain. That was the first thing. Rain hammering the roof of the porch like it had a personal grievance. Wind bending the oak tree in the front yard sideways. The kind of storm that made people pull over on the highway and waited out in their cars with the hazard lights blinking. Clara Whitfield was not in her car. She was standing on the front porch of her own house in her socks. Her maternity dress was soaked through. Her hair was plastered flat against her neck. She had no shoes. She had no coat. She had a hand pressed flat against her belly, feeling for the slow, rolling reassurance she had come to rely on more than anything else in the past 8 months. The baby moved. One long, deliberate kick. Good, Clara thought. We are both still here. Behind the glass panel of the front door, she could see the light in the hallway. She could hear Donovan's voice. He was not shouting. That was the thing that kept striking her as wrong. The way a picture hung, crooked, strikes you wrong. He was not shouting. He was talking. Calm and measured and reasonable. The way he always was when he wanted to manage a situation rather than acknowledge it. She raised her hand to ring the bell. She stopped. She raised it again. She stopped again. 3 times she stood there with her hand lifted and her finger an inch from her own doorbell. 3 times she could not make herself press it, because pressing it meant asking permission to enter her own home, and something in her, some quiet and very old part of her that had been waiting a long time for this moment, said no. That is not how this ends. She turned and walked to her car, slowly, not running, walking. She got in. She pulled the door shut. The rain on the windshield was so heavy she could barely see the house. just the light in the hallway, blurred and golden, distorted by the water running down the glass. She sat there and did not turn the key. The clock on the dashboard read 9:47 p.m. She picked up her phone. She locked it. She unlocked it. She locked it again. She unlocked it. She stared at the screen. She locked it one more time and set it face down on the passenger seat. Then she picked it back up and called Bess. Bess answered on the first ring. She always answered on the first ring when it was Clara, because Clara's calls went to voicemail unless something was wrong. They had an unspoken agreement about this that neither of them had ever discussed. Bess said nothing for a half second. Then she said, "Where are you? I am coming." "Stay home," Clara said. "It is a storm. I am fine." "Clara Elizabeth Whitfield," Bess said. "You are 8 months pregnant, and you are calling me at 9:47 on a Tuesday night. Where are you?" Clara told her the name of the 24-hour diner 3 miles away, the one with the vinyl booths and the neon sign in the window and the waitress who always brought extra crackers without being asked. She drove there with both hands on the wheel, and the heat turned all the way up. She was shaking from the cold, or from something that felt like cold. She was not sure of the difference anymore. She had come home early tonight. That was how it started, the way so many things start. A small deviation from the expected. Her appointment with the board attorney had ended 40 minutes ahead of schedule. The attorney, a quiet man named Hollis, who had worked with her family for a decade, had been efficient and thorough, and she had walked out of his downtown office into the evening air feeling lighter than she had in weeks. She had thought, "I will surprise Donovan. I will come home, and we will sit on the couch, and I will put my feet in his lap, and we will watch something neither of us cares about, and it will be a normal evening." She had wanted a normal evening so badly she could taste it. Instead, she had walked into her kitchen and found Petra Holt. Petra Holt, who was 29 years old and worked at Donovan's architecture firm and had been described to Clara as a colleague, a collaborator, a very talented designer. Petra Holt, who was sitting on a stool at Clara's kitchen island, wearing Clara's white robe, drinking Clara's coffee from Clara's blue ceramic mug, flipping through a design portfolio spread across Clara's granite countertop with the comfortable, proprietary ease of a woman in a room she had been in many times before. Clara had stood in the doorway for a full 30 seconds and said nothing. Donovan had come out of the bedroom. He had looked at Clara. Then he had looked at Petra. His face had gone through several expressions very quickly before it settled into the controlled, reasonable expression Clara recognized as his management face. He said, "You are not supposed to be home yet." Clara heard him say it. She registered each word separately. You were not supposed to be home yet. Not, "This is not what it looks like." Not, "I can explain." Not her name even, soft with apology. You were not supposed to be home yet. She had walked to the bedroom. She had folded one change of clothes into a bag. Her hands were steady. She did not know how they were steady. They simply were. Donovan followed her. His voice was controlled. He said Petra was a colleague. He said Clara had been emotionally unavailable since the pregnancy. He said this was not what it looked like. He said many things in that controlled and reasonable voice, and Clara listened to all of them from somewhere that felt very far away, like listening to a radio in another room. Then Agnes appeared. Agnes Whitfield, Donovan's mother, who had apparently been in the guest room all afternoon and whom Clara had not known was in the house. Agnes, who had never approved of Clara without quite being able to say why. Agnes, who had a gift for making her disapproval feel like concern. Agnes looked at the bag in Clara's hands. She looked at Petra, still sitting at the island in the kitchen. She looked at Clara's belly, and then she said, very softly, in the tone of a woman suggesting a remedy, "Maybe some air would do you good." Clara did not have a clear memory of the next 2 minutes. She remembered the front door. She remembered the rain being colder than she expected. She did not remember if she walked out or was guided out or simply found herself outside through some combination of the two. She supposed the distinction no longer mattered very much. What she knew was she was on the porch, and then she was in her car, and now she was in the diner, in the corner booth farthest from the door, with her wet hair and her wet dress and her bare feet tucked up under her on the vinyl seat. The waitress, a woman named Darlene, who had the look of someone who had seen most varieties of human difficulty and made her peace with all of them, brought her a coffee without being asked. She set it down without comment. She brought a small basket of crackers. She moved away quietly. Clara wrapped both hands around the mug. The warmth traveled up through her palms and into her arms, and she breathed out slowly, and the shaking began, very gradually, to ease. Her phone lit up on the table. Not Donovan, not Agnes. A message from an encrypted contact listed only as FCA Holdings. She read it at the table. Emergency board convening Friday. Your presence required. The Aldous situation has escalated. She turned the phone face down. Not tonight, she thought. Tonight I am just a woman in a wet dress who needs crackers. But even as she thought it, she felt something shift, very slightly inside her. Some gear beginning to turn that had been still for a long time. Bess arrived 11 minutes later. She came through the diner door, with her hair wind-wrecked and her pajama top tucked into jeans she had clearly pulled on over the pajama bottoms, and a coat she had not fully buttoned. She looked around the diner, found Clara, and walked directly to the booth, and sat down across from her. She looked at Clara's soaked hair. She looked at her bare feet. She looked at her hands around the coffee mug. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not say, "I knew it." She did not say anything at all. For a long moment, she signaled Darlene for 2 more coffees and a bowl of soup, and then she looked at Clara and waited. That was the most loving thing Bess Hargrove had ever done. Clara held the mug tighter. He was not alone, she said. Bess was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said, "Honey, I have been biting my tongue for 2 years." The diner hummed quietly around them. A trucker sat at the counter, eating eggs. A young couple shared a slice of pie at the window table, leaning toward each other over the plate. The rain continued to beat against the glass, but in here the sound was softer, less like an accusation, more like television left on in another room. Bess did not ask questions. This was what made Bess essential. She sat and she drank her coffee, and she let the silence be what it needed to be until Clara was ready to fill it. Clara began to talk. She started with the practical things, the things that had a shape she could hold. Donovan had not come home before 11 on most nights this past month. She had told herself it was the Hartwell Tower project, his firm's biggest commission. The thing he had been working toward for the better part of a decade. She had made excuses for him inside her own head, with the efficiency of a woman who had been making excuses for a long time and had gotten very good at it. Pregnant women need rest, she had told herself. She was tired. She was not tracking him closely. That was healthy. That was normal. That was what people who trusted each other did. But then there were the small things. The small things were the ones that would not stay quiet now. The cologne, February. Donovan had come home one evening smelling of something that was not as usual. A warmer scent, something with a floral edge. She had noticed it and then immediately not noticed it. Her brain had supplied an explanation before she even asked for one. Maybe his gym had changed their soap. She had believed this. She had chosen to believe it, and then had set the choosing down somewhere she did not have to look at it. The hotel receipt. March. She had found it in his jacket pocket while looking for his dry cleaning ticket. The Pembroke. Downtown. One night, a weeknight, a night she remembered him telling her he was working late. She had held the receipt in her hand for perhaps 10 seconds. Then she had asked him. He said a client dinner that ran long. A problem with the parking garage. A quick decision to just stay over rather than drive home at 2 in the morning. His voice was so reasonable. She had nodded. She had let it go. She had folded the receipt and put it back in the pocket and never mentioned it again. The phone. The phone turned face down every single time, every meal, every evening on the couch. Every time she entered a room where he was sitting. Screen down, every time. She had read an article about healthy digital boundaries. She had cited this article to herself repeatedly as justification. She had been grateful for the explanation the article provided. Bess listened to all of this without interrupting. Outside, the storm pushed hard against the windows. Darlene brought the soup without being asked and set it at Clara's elbow. Then Clara said the thing she had not planned to say. She said, "I am not crazy. I know what I saw. I have always known. I just kept choosing not to see it." She said it quietly, not to Bess exactly, more to the air in front of her, more to the version of herself that had been standing in that kitchen doorway for months, politely looking away. Bess reached across the table and covered Clara's hand with hers. She held it there. Clara kept talking. She talked about the pregnancy, about the past 7 months, which had been, in retrospect, she could see it now with terrible clarity, the loneliest of her life. Donovan had come to 2 prenatal appointments, 2 out of 12. He said work. She said okay, every time she said okay. Her doctor, Nadine Cross, had asked once, in that gentle, careful way of someone choosing words very deliberately, whether Clara had good support at home. Clara had said yes. She had been lying. Not to protect Donovan, she realized now, to protect herself from the reality of the answer. Bess shifted in her seat. She turned her coffee mug in a slow circle. Then she said, "Can I tell you something I never told you?" Clara looked at her. "I saw them together," Bess said. "In October, that weekend you went to Boston, the property thing you said you had to attend, I saw them at the Lakeview, sitting at the bar, close together, and Petra." She paused. "She was wearing your sweater. The green cashmere one you said you lost at the gym." The diner was very quiet around that sentence. Clara looked down at the coffee mug, the soup, the basket of crackers. She looked at these things carefully and separately. As if cataloging them, she said, "How long have you known?" Bess said, 4 months. I was trying to figure out how to tell you. Clara, you were pregnant, you were happy, or you were doing the most convincing impression of happy I have ever seen in my life. Every time I thought about saying something, I thought about your face, and I could not do it. I could not be the one who did that to your face. Clara nodded. Once, slowly. "Are you angry with me?" Bess asked. The trucker at the counter finished his eggs and paid and left. The couple at the window table were laughing softly about something. Outside, the rain had begun, very slightly, to ease. "No," Clara said. "You were protecting me. I was protecting me. We were all protecting the wrong thing." A silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just wide. Then Bess asked the question that had been waiting at the edge of the conversation since she walked through the door. She said, "So what are you going to do?" Clara set her mug down. She looked at her hands on the table. at the ring finger of her left hand, which was bare now. She had taken the ring off in the car. It was in the cup holder. She was not sure when she had done this. She was not sure it had been a decision exactly. Her body had simply made a correction. She said, "Bess, there is something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Bess went still. Clara said, "You have always thought my family had some money. Old money. A trust, managed by attorneys. You assumed I was being modest about it in the way that people from certain backgrounds are modest, understated, private." "Right," Bess said slowly. "I was not being modest." Clara looked at her directly. "My grandfather was Gordon Whitmore. He built Callaway Whitmore Industries in 1971. By the time he died 11 years ago, it had become an international holding company, energy, real estate, infrastructure, pharmaceutical distribution across 14 countries." She paused. "I am the controlling shareholder. I have been since I turned 21. The company's estimated value is approximately $50 billion. The word 50 hung in the air of the diner like a note struck on a piano. Bess stared at her. Clara said, "Donovan has never known. Not one word of it. I kept it completely separate from my personal life. I had reasons. At the time, they seemed like good reasons." Bess opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "50 billion," she said, "approximately. He threw a $50 billion woman out of her own house into a storm in her socks. Yes?" Bess put both hands over her face. Her shoulders began to shake. It took Clara a moment to understand that she was laughing, not lightly or politely, but the deep, helpless, horrified laugh of a person who has just been given information so surreal that the only response available is the one usually reserved for funerals and disasters. And then Clara laughed too. Just a little. Just enough. The kind of laugh that lives right next to crying and is sometimes the only way to keep the crying at a distance for one more minute. Darlene came by and refilled their coffees without comment. She was, Clara thought, an extraordinary human being. They stayed in the diner until midnight. Darlene brought a second bowl of soup at some point without being asked. She refilled the coffee 4 times. She did not ask what was wrong. She did not ask anything. She moved around them, like weather, present and unobtrusive. And this was its own kind of grace. Clara, warmed and fed, and no longer shaking, began to explain. The story of her wealth was not a glamorous one. That was the first thing she wanted Bess to understand. It was not a story about yachts or penthouses or charity galas, though those things existed on the periphery of it. It was the story of a girl who grew up inside something very large and very complicated, and who spent most of her adult life trying to find a door in the wall of it that opened into something ordinary. Her mother died when Clara was 9. Breast cancer, fast-moving, over in 11 months. Her father was not cruel. He was simply not there in any meaningful way, present in body and absent in everything that mattered. He remarried when Clara was 12 and moved to Portland and sent birthday cards that arrived 3 days late, and checks at Christmas, and not much else. She was raised partly at her grandfather's estate in Connecticut. Gordon Whitmore was 71 years old when Clara was 9, a broad-shouldered man with a slow way of speaking and a library that smelled of old paper and the ghost of a pipe he had given up 20 years earlier, but whose memory lived permanently in the walls. He taught her to read financial documents at age 14, the same way other grandfathers taught grandchildren to fish. Patient, methodical, treating her intelligence as a given. He died when she was 21. She had known about the inheritance since she was 16. He prepared her for it the way he prepared for everything, thoroughly and without sentiment. But knowing a thing in theory and receiving it in reality were different experiences entirely. She had sat in Ruth Calloway's office at 21 and read the documents that described what she now controlled and felt something close to vertigo. Not excitement, not joy, weight. A cold, significant weight she had been carrying in varying ways ever since. When she met Donovan at a gallery, opening 4 years ago, she had been using her mother's maiden name, Clara Ashton. It was not precisely a deception. She had been doing it since her mid-20s, using the maternal name in personal contexts, so that she could exist in rooms without being immediately identified with a $50 billion holding company. She told herself she would disclose when the time was right, when she was certain, when the relationship was solid enough to hold the information without it changing everything. The time had never quite been right enough. Bess listened to all of this with the focused attention she brought to things that mattered to her. She did not interrupt. She did not react visibly. She absorbed. When Clara finished, Bess was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He never had any idea." "None," Clara said. "He thought I had a family trust, a comfortable amount. Enough that I did not need to work for income, but not enough to be remarkable. And the house. My name on the deed. Mine before I met him. Purchased through a subsidiary of the Callaway Whitmore Trust 18 months before we were introduced." Bess turned her coffee mug in a slow circle. "And your reasons," she said, "for not telling him. You said they seemed good at the time." "I wanted to be chosen," Clara said. "As a person, not as a portfolio. I wanted one relationship in my life where I knew without any possibility of doubt that the person beside me was there because of who I was, not what I controlled." She paused. That was the reason. It seemed sufficient. "It was a good reason," Bess said. "It was a good reason with a significant flaw." "Which was?" Clara looked at her hands. "It protected me from doubt. But it also protected him from accountability. I never let the real thing into the room, so I never actually tested whether he would have chosen me without it." Outside, the storm had quieted to a steady rain. The night felt different now, calmer, like something had been decided. Clara slept in Bess's guest room that night. The room was small and smelled of lavender from a plug-in near the door. She lay on her back because it was the only comfortable position in the last trimester, and she stared at the ceiling and did the things she had done since childhood when she could not sleep. She walked through the rooms of the Connecticut estate, room by room, from memory. The front hallway with its dark wood floors and the brass coat hooks. The library, the smell of it, old paper and wood smoke and the faint ghost of tobacco and the deeper smell of accumulated time. The kitchen where she had eaten cereal at 6 in the morning on summer visits, while the housekeeper moved quietly around her and pretended not to watch. The back garden where she had sat on the stone bench at age 14 and told a girl from sailing camp the first real secret she had ever shared with anyone her own age. She was mapping herself. That was what she was doing. She was walking back through the rooms of herself that existed before Donovan, before this marriage, before the life she had built around a version of herself that was smaller than the real one. She was finding those rooms, making sure they were still there. The baby kicked 3 times, slow and deliberate. Clara placed her hand flat on her belly. She opened the Notes app on her phone. She scrolled to the list she had been building since 12 weeks along. Names, a long list, added to in odd moments. Waiting rooms, early mornings, the passenger seat on long drives. Donovan had never asked to see it. She had never offered. She realized now, lying in Bess's guest room at midnight, that she was glad. This list was entirely hers. The name she chose would be entirely hers to give. She read through it in the dark. She did not choose yet, but she read through it and felt, for the first time since standing on that porch in the rain, something that was not dread. At 7 in the morning, she called Ruth Calloway. Ruth answered on the first ring. Clara said, "Ruth, he does not know about the holdings. He has never known. I need to know where I stand." Ruth said, "You stand on solid ground. I made sure of that the moment you told me you were engaged." Clara was quiet for a moment. She said, "You had a prenuptial prepared." "I had 3 versions prepared," Ruth said. "One for the scenario where he knew and disclosed, one for the scenario where he discovered it during the marriage, and one for this exact scenario. Which version do you need?" "The third one," Clara said. "I will have everything ready by end of day," Ruth said. "Are you safe? Is the baby?" "We are both fine." A pause. Ruth's voice shifted by a fraction. The professional precision softened, just at the edges. The way it did, only in their most private conversations. She said, "Your grandfather said you were the most competent person he had ever known in his life. He said the only thing that concerned him was that you were too generous with your trust." Clara did not respond to this. "Come to the office at 2, Ruth said. "Use the back entrance." Clara said she would. She set the phone down. She stood at Bess's kitchen window with a cup of tea and watched the morning. The storm had passed, the street was washed clean, everything glistened. She said, quietly, to the window, "I deserved better than this. I do not need to qualify that, or earn it, or explain it. I simply deserved better." Bess, appearing in the kitchen doorway in her robe, did not respond to this. She just nodded once, very slowly, and went to make more tea, because some things do not need a reply. They just need a witness. At 9:15 that morning, Donovan called. Claire watched the phone ring on Bess's kitchen counter. Once, twice, 3 times, 4. She did not answer. He left a voicemail. She listened to it standing at the window with her second cup of tea, the phone held slightly away from her ear as if proximity to his voice might be a contact hazard. His voice was controlled. There was softness at the edges. Just enough. The particular softness of a man who understood that softness was a tool. He said he was sorry about how last night went. He said things had escalated in a way he had not intended. He said Petra was a colleague, and he understood how it looked, but if Clara would come home, they could talk about it rationally and work through it. He said he was worried about the baby. He said he loved her. He said, "I love her the way a person says a word they have repeated so many times it has gone smooth. Like a stone from a river, the meaning worn away by repetition until what remained was just the shape of it." Clara listened to the whole message. Then she played it a second time. Not because she needed to hear it again, because she needed to confirm something she suspected. He thought she had nowhere to go. He thought she would come back. He thought this was a manageable situation, a thing to be contained and reasoned through and resolved in his favor. He had no idea. He had genuinely no idea who was on the other end of that phone call. She deleted the message. She texted Ruth, "I will be there at 2. Thank you." Then she opened her messages and found Franklin Aldous. Franklin was 71 years old and had been Gordon Whitmore's business partner for 32 years and was, in Clara's estimation, one of the 3 most trustworthy people she had ever known. He served as her informal advisor to the Calloway Whitmore board and had been, since Gordon's death, the person she called when something significant shifted. She wrote, "Franklin, I need to talk. The situation at home has changed. I will explain more tomorrow. Need to accelerate the restructuring timeline." He responded in 40 seconds. "I had a feeling. I am glad you are moving. The board will follow your lead. They always have. She set the phone down. Ruth's office was in a building 3 blocks from the flower market district. The back entrance opened onto a side street that smelled of cut stems and standing water. Clara had used this entrance 11 times in her adult life. Every time had been a moment when she needed to move through the city without being a symbol of anything. She was grateful for it today. Ruth's office was exactly as it had always been. Bookshelves from floor to ceiling on 3 walls. A walnut desk that had been her father's and his father's before that. A silver-framed photograph of Gordon Whitmore at age 45 on the corner of the desk, looking like a man who believed in the permanence of things he had built. Ruth herself sat behind the desk in a gray wool jacket, documents already arranged in front of her in precise stacks. They sat, Ruth walked her through the documents. Clara read every page. She had always read every page. Gordon had taught her this at 16. Never sign what you have not read, and never marry what you have not examined. She had applied the first principle rigorously her entire adult life. The second she had applied less carefully than she now wished she had. The prenuptial was airtight. It had been drafted with the specific scenario of wholly undisclosed assets in mind. The house where she had stood in the rain in her socks while her husband's calm voice reached her through the glass, was in Clara's name alone. She had purchased it 18 months before she met Donovan, as a personal residence held in a family trust. His name had never appeared on the deed. He had assumed, as people assume things that seem logical, that a home they shared was a shared asset. He was incorrect. Then Ruth said, "He has no claim on the house, no claim on any Callaway Whitmore assets or subsidiaries. His firm, Whitfield Design Group, received one major architectural commission 3 years ago from a corporate client called Meridian Holdings. He has always known this client as a standard corporate account. He does not know that Meridian Holdings is a subsidiary of Callaway Whitmore Industries. He does not know he has been working, in effect, for you." Clara was very still. "He does not know he has been working for me," she said, "for 3 years." She thought about the Meridian building, Donovan's favorite project, the one he talked about at dinner parties with that particular brightness in his expression, the professional pride of a man who had been given a significant commission and had executed it well. The pride of someone who had, he believed, earned something real. She had built the opportunity that gave him that pride. She had not done it deliberately. It was simply the nature of what she controlled. Subsidiaries contracted with vendors and service providers constantly. She did not personally review every contract. But the fact remained. For 3 years, Donovan Whitfield had been living partially on money that originated from his wife's hidden empire without knowing it. She said, "I want to dissolve the Meridian contract within its legal terms. Full severance per the agreement. No indication it is connected to me personally." Ruth said, "The renewal is in 60 days. You simply choose not to renew. Then we do not renew." She said it the way you close something that has run its course. Clean, final, without drama. At 4 o'clock, Bess sent a voice message. Her voice was doing the particular thing it did when she was attempting to appear calm about something that was not calm. She said, "Agnes Whitfield called me. Got my number from a Christmas card, apparently. She wants me to help her convince you to come home." She used the phrase, "your condition," 3 times in 90 seconds. She also said Donovan is under a lot of professional stress and does not need additional strain at home right now. I am paraphrasing, but barely. Clara listened to this and felt something that was not quite anger and not quite amusement, but lived in the neighborhood of both. Then Marcus Trent called. Marcus was 42 and had been Donovan's business partner for 8 years. He was, in Clara's private assessment, a fundamentally decent man who had made the miscalculation of building his professional life around a person of lesser character. She had always respected Marcus. She had always sensed that the respect was returned. He said, "Clara, I want you to know I am not calling for him. I am calling because I want to know you are okay." "I am okay," she said. "I am with Bess." A pause, then, "Was Petra there when you came home last night?" "Yes." "I am sorry," he said. "I told him 6 months ago he was making choices that were going to cost him things he did not understand the value of." A breath. "I am genuinely sorry, Clara." She believed him. She believed him completely. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything." "What is he telling people?" The silence on Marcus's end lasted long enough to be its own answer. She understood from the shape of it that Donovan had already been making calls, already constructing the story. The story in which Clara was fragile, hormonally compromised, prone to overreaction, in need of management and reassurance. The story in which he was the worried, reasonable, long-suffering husband trying to talk sense into his emotional, pregnant wife. He was building his narrative. He had probably started before she even reached the diner. She thanked Marcus and ended the call. That evening, in Bess's bathroom, Clara reorganized the contents of her overnight bag 3 times. Toiletries, change of clothes, phone charger, the small leather notebook she carried everywhere. She lined them up on the counter. She rearranged them. She lined them up again. It made no logical sense. It made complete sense. "Control what you can control," Gordon used to say. "Start small. Start with what is directly in front of you." What was directly in front of her, a toothbrush, a charger, a notebook, and approximately $50 billion worth of decisions. She opened the notebook to a blank page. She wrote, "Somewhere along the way I became invisible in that house. Not to everyone, just to him. And I let it happen because I thought invisible was safe. It was not safe. It was just small." She closed the notebook. She looked at herself in the mirror for a long moment. "I am not small," she said, quietly, to her own reflection. "I have never been small." Then her phone buzzed. A message from Franklin. "Board meeting confirmed Friday, 10 a.m. Also, Elspeth Vance wants to speak with you privately beforehand. She says it concerns Donovan. I did not know she knew him personally. She would not tell me more." Clara stared at this message. Elspeth Vance, the board's most senior independent director, a woman who had been on the Callaway Whitmore board since before Clara was born, a woman who communicated with extreme economy and disclosed only what she had decided was necessary. What did Elspeth Vance know about Donovan Whitfield? Wednesday morning came in gray and quiet. Clara woke at 5:47 with her heart beating in the wrong rhythm and a feeling she had not had in months. Not grief, not anger, something more fundamental: fear. The clean animal fear of a person who has just understood, in the full light of a new morning, that the ground they have been standing on for years was not as solid as they believed. She sat up. The room was dark. Lavender, from the plug-in near the door. She almost laughed at the lavender. Agnes wore lavender. She had worn it every time Claire had seen her. It was her signature. Even now, at 5:47 in the morning in someone else's guest room, the smell of it had followed Clara here, and she could not quite separate it from the memory of Agnes's voice. Maybe some air would do you good. She went to the bathroom. Cold water from the tap. She held her hands under it. Then she straightened up and looked at herself in the mirror. Her hair was still slightly wrong from the rain 2 nights ago, dried in a shape that was not quite her shape. Dark circles. The particular exhaustion that lives not in the body, but behind the eyes. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman who had been thrown out of her home in a storm while 8 months pregnant, and who had spent the subsequent 40 hours rebuilding the legal and emotional infrastructure of her existence from a diner booth and a borrowed guest room. This is real, she thought. This actually happened to you, not to a character in a story about women who survived difficult things. To you, Clara Whitmore Whitfield. This is your life on a Wednesday morning, and you are going to live it. She went back to the guest room and sat on the edge of the bed. She sat there without moving for almost 4 minutes. She was not thinking about strategy. She was not thinking about the board meeting, or the prenuptial, or the Meridian contract, or Elspeth Vance's cryptic message. She was thinking about a morning 3 years ago in the early months of the marriage, when she and Donovan had driven to a lake an hour outside the city at dawn because neither of them could sleep. They had stopped at a gas station for coffee in paper cups and a box of glazed donuts, and they had sat on the hood of the car as the mist came off the water in long, slow ribbons, and she had thought, "This is it. This is what safe feels like. I have found it." She understood now, sitting in Bess's guest room on a Wednesday morning, that she had been wrong about what she was feeling that morning. She had not been feeling safe. She had been feeling the relief of not yet being hurt. These were two entirely different experiences. She was only now, at 32, learning to tell them apart. The baby moved, that slow, rolling presence that had become, in the past 48 hours, her primary anchor. The one certainty in a week of revised certainties. She placed her hand on her belly. "We are going to be okay," she said. Not with performance, not to convince herself, with the flat, deliberate weight of a decision. At 8 o'clock, she felt something wrong. Not catastrophically wrong. Not the kind of wrong that announces itself loudly. A quieter wrong. A pressure she had not felt before. A pulling sensation low and unfamiliar. She sat with it for several minutes and cataloged it the way she had been trained to catalog problems. What do I know? What do I not know? What do I need to find out? She knew. 36 weeks along. Low-risk pregnancy until now. No complications in prior appointments. She did not know whether this was normal third trimester sensation or something that required attention. She needed to find out. From Dr. Nadine Cross, her obstetrician, who had an office 20 minutes away. She called at 8:15. The clinic fit her in at 10. Bess drove her. The morning was cool and washed clean from the storm. The city looked scraped and new. They did not talk much in the car. Bess kept both hands on the wheel, and the radio on low, and this was exactly the right thing. In the waiting room, Clara filled out the standard forms. She came to the line that said emergency contact. She wrote Ruth Calloway, attorney. She wrote the office number and the cell number. The form had a second line below it, spouse or partner. She left it blank. The nurse who brought her back was warm and efficient, and asked brightly whether her husband would be joining her today. Clara said he was traveling. The lie was so smooth and practiced that she was slightly disturbed by how naturally it came. Dr. Cross was thorough and unhurried. She ran the checks, reviewed the monitors, pressed gently at Clara's abdomen in the systematic way that always reminded Clara of someone reading Braille. The baby's heartbeat came through the monitor strong and steady, a reassuring, businesslike sound. Dr. Cross said, "Everything looks good. What you are feeling is most likely prodromal labor, false labor, very common in the final trimester, especially during periods of physical or emotional stress." She said the word stress with careful neutrality. Clara said, "I'm going through something difficult, at home. Dr. Cross looked at her. She said, "Is your environment safe?" A pause. The monitor continued its steady percussion. "It is now," Clara said. "I made sure of it." Dr. Cross nodded. She made a note in the chart. She said, "You are doing well. Your body is doing what it is supposed to do. Rest, fluids, come back if the contractions become regular or intensify." Then she added, without looking up from the chart, "You are strong. Your baby knows it. The numbers show it." She said this as a clinical observation, not a comfort, a fact. Clara appreciated the precision of it. In the car afterward, she did not speak for a long time. Bess drove. The radio played something from 20 years ago, slow and soft and not requiring any attention. Clara thought about the waiting room form, the blank line where a name was supposed to go. She thought about what it meant to be 32 years old and 8 months pregnant, and to fill in your attorney's name as your emergency contact because the person who was supposed to occupy that line had chosen something else, had chosen repeatedly, over months and possibly years, to be somewhere else, to be someone else's. To let her fill in that blank alone. She allowed herself, for the first time since the porch, to feel this completely. She did not cry loudly. She had never cried loudly in her life. She cried the way she did everything. Contained, precise, hers alone. The tears came steadily, and she let them. She cried for the marriage she had believed in. For the morning on the lake with the gas station coffee and the mist on the water and the feeling she had mistaken for safety. For the name list she had built alone in waiting rooms and early mornings. For every appointment she had attended by herself. For every night she had lain awake cataloging explanations for things that required no explanation. And then, through the crying, a thought arrived. Not dramatic, not announced, just there, the way important things often were. Her daughter's name. She had been circling the name list for weeks, reading through it, coming back to certain entries, moving on. But right now, in this car, on this Wednesday morning, the name came to her with the quiet certainty of something that had always been true. Georgia. Georgia Whitmore Whitfield. After Gordon, after the man who had sat her down at 16 and said, "Here is what you are. Here is what you can do. Here is what no one can take from you." After the man who had raised her in the rooms of a house that smelled of permanence and prepared her for a weight she was still learning to carry with grace. She said it out loud. "Georgia." Bess glanced over. "Her name," Clara said. "Georgia Whitmore Whitfield." Bess reached across the seat and took Clara's hand. She held it tightly. She did not say anything. She just held on. Some things only need a witness. Clara met Ruth at 2 o'clock on Thursday. She had slept better Wednesday night than she expected. Not well, but better. She woke at 6 feeling something she had not felt since Monday evening. Clarity. The particular clarity that comes after a crisis has been fully absorbed, and the body and mind have processed it and come out the other side into a cooler, steadier place. She showered. She dressed in Bess's borrowed clothes. A dark blue top that fit over her belly and dark trousers that did not. And she ate toast and drank half a cup of coffee, and she felt, sitting at Bess's kitchen table in the morning, quiet, like someone who had been lost in a building and had just found the exit. Ruth's office smelled of old books and fresh coffee. The silver-framed photograph of Gordon watched from the corner of the desk. Ruth had the documents arranged in 3 neat stacks. She was, as always, completely prepared. They worked through everything. 2 hours of careful, systematic work. Clara asked questions. She read every document twice. She made notes in the small leather notebook. Ruth answered everything with the direct precision of a woman who had been waiting for this conversation for 18 months and had prepared for it accordingly. The house was Clara's, entirely and unambiguously. The prenuptial covered the full scope of the Callaway Whitmore holdings, with language so comprehensive that Ruth's junior partner had spent 3 weeks drafting it. Donovan's claim on anything was exactly zero. The Meridian contract would not be renewed. Ruth had already drafted the non-renewal notice. Standard language. No unusual provisions. No indication of personal motivation. On the matter of the divorce filing itself, Ruth recommended filing within the week. Cleanly, without advance warning. The filing would be the first official indication Donovan received of the actual legal landscape he was standing in. Clara approved all of it. Then Ruth said the thing she had been building toward. She said, "There is another matter. A message came to my office Tuesday morning, before you called me, from Elspeth Vance." Clara looked up. "She did not tell me the substance," Ruth said. "She said she needed to speak with you directly, before the board meeting. She was insistent on the order of that. Before the meeting," Clara said. "Not after. Specifically before." Clara thought about Elspeth, had known her since childhood, had sat across from her at Gordon's long dinner table dozens of times, watching her redirect conversations with the efficiency of a chess player who always sees 6 moves ahead. Elspeth Vance did not say things unless they needed to be said. She did not request private meetings without a reason that justified the request. "Arrange it for Thursday morning," Clara said. 8 o'clock. They met in a private dining room at the Alderton Hotel, where Elspeth maintained a permanent suite. It was the kind of room designed for conversations that required privacy. Small, wood-paneled, no windows, a table set for 2 with good coffee and no interruptions. Elspeth was already seated when Clara arrived. She looked the same as she always had. White hair in its severe chignon, dark suit, the precise stillness of a woman who had learned to conserve energy by eliminating all unnecessary movement. She said, "I'm going to tell you something that should have been said before you married him. I chose not to say it because I believed the evidence was insufficient. I have since reconsidered that judgment, and I want you to know I consider it an error." Clara said, "Tell me." Elspeth said, 18 months before you met Donovan Whitfield, he was engaged to a woman named Carol Partridge. Her father was Randall Partridge of the Partridge Group. Commercial property, personal wealth of approximately $300 million. The engagement ended when Donovan discovered that the Partridge Group was in significantly worse financial condition than its public profile suggested. The family money he had anticipated was not going to materialize in the way he had planned. Clara did not move. Carol Partridge told a mutual acquaintance, Elspeth continued, that he had been, throughout their relationship, attentive and warm and apparently devoted, that he changed overnight when the financial reality became clear, that the change was so complete and so immediate that she described it as discovering she had been living with a person who did not exist. The coffee in Clara's cup had gone cool. She did not touch it. "He does this with intention," Elspeth said. "He identifies women who appear to have money, not loud, obvious wealth. The understated kind, old family money, quiet success. He is intelligent about it. He cultivates relationships with women who seem unlikely to discuss their finances openly. Carol was not the first. There was a woman in Boston 3 years before Carol. Similar circumstances. Similar ending." Clara's voice was steady when she spoke. "He married me believing I had a comfortable family trust. Enough to be attractive, not enough to be intimidating." That is my understanding of his understanding, Elspeth said. He married what he believed was a quietly wealthy, manageable woman. She held Clara's eyes. He married the wrong woman. A silence. Then Elspeth opened the folder that had been sitting on the table between them since Clara arrived. She slid 2 photographs across the table. The first, Clara and Donovan at a charity gala. Standard event photograph. But in the background, visible over Donovan's shoulder, partially turned away from the camera, Petra Holt. The second, Petra Holt exiting an office building. The logo on the building's facade was visible. Hargrove Wills Architectural Group, a firm that had, in the past year, been consistently ahead of Whitfield Design Group on 3 major commercial pitches, including Hartwell Tower. She is feeding information, Clara said. Not a question. We believe so. Hargrove Wills has submitted winning bids on projects where Donovan's team had superior designs. The margin of advantage they demonstrated suggests access to internal information about Whitfield Design Group's proposals before submission. Clara thought, he was using her. She was using him, and both of them believed they were using me. Something moved through her at that thought. Not anger exactly. Something more precise than anger. The feeling of a mechanism clicking cleanly into place. Comprehension. The relief of a picture that is finally resolved into focus. She thanked Elspeth. She meant it. She walked out of the hotel and into the Thursday morning and stopped on the sidewalk. People moved around her. Commuters, a woman pushing a stroller, a man in a blue jacket talking into his phone, the city doing its ordinary morning business. She stood very still in the middle of all of it. She said, quietly, to herself, the hardest part is admitting I knew all along. Not about the scheme, not about the money, about him. I knew who he was. I kept choosing the version I wanted, instead of the version that was actually there. She breathed. The morning smelled of coffee and exhaust and the lingering freshness from the rain. I am done choosing the wrong version, she said. She walked to the car. Thursday afternoon, Clara sat in Ruth's conference room with files spread across the table and worked for 4 hours without stopping. Divorce timeline, property documentation, corporate restructuring memo, the non-renewal letter for the Meridian contract, which she signed with a steady hand. Ruth brought her lunch at 1 o'clock and set it at her elbow without interrupting. Clara ate without tasting it. She was not hungry. She was running on something that was not quite adrenaline and not quite resolve, but lived somewhere between the two. A cold, efficient fuel that she recognized from other difficult seasons of her life. Gordon had had this quality too. The ability to become, under pressure, not smaller and more brittle, but larger and more precise. She had not always trusted herself to have inherited it. She was trusting herself now. Ruth sat across from her at 3 o'clock and said, "Can I ask you something personal?" Clara said, "Yes." "How are you? Not legally, not strategically. How are you?" Clara considered the question seriously. She did not deflect it. She said, "I am sad. I am angry. The anger is quieter than I expected. It does not feel like fire. It feels like very cold water, clear, and I can see through it to the bottom." She paused. "I think I will grieve this properly later. Right now there is too much to do, and the grief is waiting. It knows it will get its turn." Ruth nodded. "That sounds right," she said. "That sounds like you." "Is it enough to function on?" Clara asked. "You have been functioning on it since Tuesday night," Ruth said. "I think you have your answer." Clara almost smiled. At 5 o'clock she left the office. She had arranged with Marcus to return to the house. While Donovan was at a client dinner, Marcus had confirmed was scheduled for the evening. She had arranged for a locksmith and a licensed moving assistant through Ruth's office. She was not planning to take furniture or large items. She was planning to take the things that were hers before the marriage and the things that were hers alone during it. The house looked the same from the outside. The oak tree in the front yard had lost several small branches in Monday's storm. They were still lying on the grass, not yet gathered. The light in the front hallway was on. It had been on every night for the 4 years she had lived here. She had always left it on, a habit from childhood, a house that felt lived in and safe. She wondered if it would be left on when she was gone, or if darkness would settle in through that glass panel like something that had been waiting for permission. She walked through the front door with her key. The house smelled the same, coffee and cedar from the candles she kept in the living room, the specific warm smell of rooms that had been lived in by the same people for years. She stood in the hallway for a moment and let herself feel it. The weight of familiar spaces, the way a home accumulates the sediment of its inhabitants until the walls themselves seem to hold the shape of lives lived inside them. Then she moved. She moved through the rooms with quiet efficiency. Her grandmother's ring from the jewelry box in the bedroom closet, the 3 locked boxes of personal documents from her private office, the photograph of herself and Gordon at 15, standing in front of the Connecticut estate on a summer afternoon, both of them squinting into the sun with the same expression, the name list she had printed last month from the Notes app on her phone. She had wanted a paper version. She took it from the bedside table and folded it carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. She walked through the living room. She looked at the good lamp, the bookshelves. She ran her hand along the kitchen counter, along the spot where Petra had sat in her robe, comfortable and proprietary, drinking Clara's coffee from Clara's blue mug. She did not linger there. She found the throw blanket on the arm of the couch, the one she had bought at a Christmas market in Vienna the winter before she met Donovan. Thick wool, deep burgundy, with a narrow stripe of gold. She had had it for 6 years. It was older than the marriage. It had nothing to do with the marriage. She took it. It was hers before him. It would be hers after. She was moving toward the front door when she stopped. On the kitchen counter, a design portfolio, open, large format, the kind used for client presentations. She recognized the project immediately. The Hartwell Tower, Donovan's most significant professional ambition. The document was covered in annotations, some in Donovan's familiar handwriting, some in a hand she did not recognize, smaller and more precise. Petra's, she assumed. She should not look further. She looked further. On the last page of the portfolio, partially obscured by a yellow legal pad, a logo. The logo of a holding company. She knew this logo the way she knew the logos of several hundred entities she controlled. She had looked at it in board materials for years. It was a subsidiary of Callaway Whitmore Industries. Donovan Whitfield had been pitching his greatest professional ambition to a project his wife controlled. He did not know. She took out her phone. She photographed the portfolio page. She sent it to Ruth. Ruth's reply came in 40 seconds. "I see it. Are you all right?" Clara looked around the kitchen one more time. The counter, the island, the blue mug in the dish rack, washed and waiting. She wrote back, "I am past all right. I am ready." She picked up the blanket and the boxes and walked out of the house. She did not look back. Friday, 9:58 a.m. Clara Whitmore. Whitfield walked through the lobby of the Callaway Whitmore Industries headquarters building and took the elevator to the 32nd floor. She had been in this building many times. She had attended board meetings here since she was 23. She had sat in the corner chair of the conference room and listened and asked questions and deferred to people with more operational experience while she learned the company her grandfather had built. She had been, for 11 years, a present but background force, the controlling shareholder who managed her stake from a distance, who kept the family legacy intact without fully stepping into it. Today was different. She felt the difference in her body, something aligned, something that had been slightly out of register for a long time now occupying its correct position. Franklin Aldous met her at the elevator. He was silver-haired and broad-shouldered in the way of men who have been solidly built all their lives. He had Gordon's photograph on his own desk. He had known Clara since she was 9 years old and attending board dinners as an observer. He looked at her the way men of his generation look at women they respect profoundly, but have never quite learned to say so directly. He said, "You look well, Clara." She said, "I am better than I look, which means I am doing very well." He laughed. It sounded surprised, like he had not expected to laugh this morning. The boardroom smelled of coffee and fresh paper. 9 directors sat around the oval table. Elspeth at the far end, composed and unreadable as always. Franklin at her right. 7 others arranged along both sides, with the particular posture of people who understood that something had shifted without yet knowing the precise nature of the shift. Clara sat at the head of the table. The official agenda covered third quarter financials, a proposed infrastructure acquisition across 3 states, and a subsidiary restructuring that had been in discussion for 18 months without resolution. Standard board business, the kind of agenda that could be managed at a distance from the background by a controlling shareholder who preferred not to be too present. Clara had not come to manage from a distance. She opened the meeting. She spoke for 7 minutes on the Q3 financials, identifying 2 areas of structural inefficiency that had not appeared in the pre-meeting summary prepared by the CFO. She asked questions that required specific answers. She proposed a modification to the acquisition terms for the infrastructure deal that 2 directors immediately recognized as superior to the existing proposal. She did not announce herself. She did not perform authority. She did not explain why she was more present than usual or ask permission to be heard. She simply spoke, and what she said was precise and correct and demonstrated that she had done the work, understood the material, and was not there to observe but to lead. By the 20-minute mark, the energy of the room had shifted completely. At minute 31, a board member named Douglas, he had been with the company 4 years and had a habit of addressing Clara with the particular tone of a man reminding a child that the adults were speaking, said, "Given your current personal circumstances, are you certain that this is the right time to pursue a more active role in day-to-day operations?" Every head in the room turned. Elspeth blinked once. Clara looked at Douglas. She held the look for exactly 5 seconds. Then she said, "Douglas, I am 32 years old. I am 36 weeks pregnant. I have spent the past 3 days managing a significant personal and legal crisis from a guest bedroom. I walked into this room 7 minutes ago, reviewed the Q3 summary for the first time, and identified 2 structural problems your team did not flag in the pre-meeting materials. I am going to be the most consequential thing that has happened to this board in the past decade." She paused. "I would prefer we move past the part of this meeting where you ask me if I am feeling well enough to do mathematics. Can we do that?" Douglas said nothing. Franklin Aldous cleared his throat. It sounded remarkably like applause. They moved on. The meeting ran for 53 minutes. By the end of it, 3 things had been approved, 1 acquisition had been restructured, and the subsidiary reorganization that had sat unresolved for 18 months had a clear timeline for completion. Afterward, Clara sat alone in the small adjoining room where Ruth had sometimes waited for her during earlier board meetings. Warm coffee, the city visible through a floor-to-ceiling glass in long horizontal strips of gray and silver and the muted green of parks. She rested her hands on her belly. Georgia moved, one slow, considered roll, like someone turning over in sleep. Clara sat quietly for a while and thought of nothing in particular. She let the morning settle around her. Let the weight of the past 4 days find its resting place. This is yours, she thought. Not the building, not the portfolio, not the $50 billion that she had spent most of her life trying to exist at a manageable distance from. This, the ability to walk into a room and be the truest version of yourself and have the room respond to that truth. The ability to lead from an authentic center. This was yours before it was theirs, before any of it was formal or official or documented. It was always yours. You just forgot to walk into it. She finished the coffee. She buttoned her coat. She took the elevator down. Friday afternoon, 3:15 p.m. The divorce papers were served to Donovan Whitfield at his office at Whitfield Design Group. Ruth had arranged this through her firm's courier service with the same calm efficiency she applied to all logistical matters. Standard delivery, standard paperwork. Nothing in the presentation that signaled anything other than a routine legal document. Nothing, that is, except its contents. Marcus Trent was in the office when the papers arrived. He told Claire about it later that evening in the careful, measured tone of someone conveying information they witnessed but did not entirely have words for. He said, his face went through about 4 different things in maybe 6 seconds. Clara said, "What 4 things?" Marcus said, "Confusion, dismissal. You know, the thing he does where he decides something is smaller than it is before he has even finished reading it. Then he read it again, and then," he paused. "I do not have a good word for the 4th one. It was the face of someone understanding something very large. The documents included, as legally required, a summary of relevant assets held by the petitioning party. The prenuptial agreement was referenced. The trust structure was named. And within the trust structure documentation, 3 words appeared that had not appeared in any conversation, any document, any context that Donovan had ever encountered in connection with his wife, Callaway Whitmore Industries." Marcus said. Donovan sat still for a moment after the 3rd reading. Then he typed something on his computer. He was searching. He found what anyone would find who searched those words. A privately held international holding company founded in 1971 by Gordon Whitmore. Energy, real estate, infrastructure, pharmaceutical distribution across 14 countries. Current estimated value, per the most recent available analysis, $50 billion. Controlling shareholder, Clara Whitmore Whitfield. Marcus said Donovan sat at his desk for approximately 4 minutes without speaking. Then he said, very quietly, to his computer screen, "She was always this. This whole time, she was always this." Marcus said, "Yes." Donovan said, "Did you know?" "No," Marcus said. "I did not know." A long pause. "Would you have treated her differently," Marcus said, "if you had known?" Donovan did not answer. Marcus said he took that as a yes. He excused himself from the office and did not return that day. 2 hours later, Petra Holt called Clara. Clara answered. She was sitting in Bess's kitchen with a cup of tea, and she was mildly curious about what Petra would say. In the way you are curious about the resolution of a story you have already mostly understood. Petra's voice was controlled, but not entirely. The edges frayed in a way that suggested effort required to maintain the control. She said she had heard about the papers. She said she wanted Clara to know she had not known about. She paused. The full situation. She said she was not proud of everything that had happened. She said she genuinely had not realized that Clara was... She paused again. Clara said, "You did not know what I was worth." Petra was quiet. "You assumed I was ordinary," Clara said. "Both of you did. Neither of you could imagine that the woman in that house, in that marriage, was the most powerful person in any room she walked into." She said this without heat, without performance. The way you state a law of physics. "I do not actually need your apology, Petra. What I need is for you and Donovan to resolve your situation without any further involvement from me." A pause. "I would also recommend examining your current employer's business relationships carefully. Some of them may become complicated in the near future." She ended the call. She held the phone in her hand for a moment. She did not feel triumphant. She had expected to feel triumphant, and she did not. What she felt was clean, the way a room feels after it has been properly aired, breathable, clear. An hour later, Donovan called. She answered. She had decided she would answer this call once. She wanted the last conversation to be one she had chosen rather than one she had avoided. He said, "Clara." His voice was different, stripped of the management tone, stripped of the reasonable and controlled, just his voice, bare. "I do not know what to say." She said, "I know. Everything, the company. Why did you never—" "Because I wanted to be chosen," she said, "as a person, not as a portfolio, not as an inheritance, as a person, Donovan. I kept it separate, for the same reason people keep certain things private in new relationships, because I wanted what was between us to be real." He was quiet. "The tragedy," she said, "is that I think in the very beginning it might have been. I think you genuinely liked who I was, and then you got comfortable, and comfortable became careless, and careless became this." She did not say what this was. She did not need to. They both knew. "That is the part I will need a long time to think about, not the betrayal, the beginning. Whether it was ever what I thought it was." He said, "I am sorry." She sat with those words for a moment. She turned them over. She examined them for the substance she needed to find in them before she could respond honestly. "I believe you," she said. "I think you mean it. It does not change the outcome, but I believe you mean it." She ended the call. She put the phone in her pocket. She stood up and walked to the kitchen window. The city was in its early evening arrangement, the lights coming on in buildings, the sky moving from gray to the particular dark blue that arrived in the hour before dark. Bess was somewhere behind her, moving quietly, giving her space. She stood at the window with her hands around the tea mug. She was not waiting for anything. She was not bracing for the next thing. She was just standing in a kitchen that did not belong to her in borrowed clothes, with her daughter moving gently below her ribs, and the city going about its ordinary evening outside the glass. And she did not check her phone. Not once. Not for the full 15 minutes she stood there. She was completely present in her own life. For the first time in a very long time, she was simply and entirely here. 3 weeks later, Clara Whitmore Whitfield moved into the Connecticut estate. Not permanently. She was having an apartment renovated in the city, 2 miles from the Callaway Whitmore headquarters building, with particular attention to light and storage and the kind of kitchen that accommodated someone who baked her grandmother's recipes on Tuesday afternoons as a form of meditation. The apartment would be ready in 6 weeks. Until then, the Connecticut estate was right. Its library smelled the same as it always had. The back garden was beginning its slow April turn toward green. The kitchen, where she had eaten cereal at 6 in the morning as a girl, was large and warm and entirely familiar. She was the right size for it now. On a Tuesday afternoon in late March, she baked the apple cake. The recipe lived in a handwritten notebook. The ink faded to pale blue, the handwriting looping and deliberate in the way of women who learned penmanship as a considered discipline. Her grandmother's hand. She had made this cake 9 times in her adult life, and each time had been a moment of significant transition. A decision being made, a season ending, and another beginning. She did not multitask. She did not check her phone. She measured and mixed and folded with the full attention the process required, and the smell of cinnamon and warm apple rose through the kitchen and filled the rooms beyond it. And she thought, I am still here. Everything happened, and I am still standing in this kitchen making this cake. The estate's housekeeper, Mrs. Albright, appeared in the doorway at some point, assessed the situation, quietly set 2 clean baking towels on the counter without being asked, and disappeared again. This was its own kind of grace. Georgia Whitmore. Whitfield was born on a Thursday morning, 6 days past her due date, 7:14 a.m., 7 pounds and 12 ounces, dark hair, abundant from the first moment, which the delivering nurse described as remarkable, eyes that arrived in the world already focused and purposeful. Bess was in the delivery room, having appeared at the hospital at 3 in the morning in a coat thrown over pajamas and not left. She was the first person to hold Georgia, after Clara, and the expression on her face when she did it was not one Claire had ever seen on Bess before. Something stripped down, something true and unguarded and utterly without the wit and irony Bess usually kept around herself as gentle armor. She held the baby for 2 minutes and then handed her back. She said, "She has Gordon's soupish jaw." Clara looked at her daughter's face, the particular set of the jaw, the concentrated expression of someone encountering the world with assessment rather than surprise. "She does," Clara said. Ruth Calloway was in the waiting area. She sent a single text when the birth was confirmed. "She will be extraordinary, as will her mother." Franklin Aldous sent flowers that arrived within the hour, a feat of advanced preparation that was so precisely like him that Clara laughed out loud when the nurse brought them in, laughed in the way of someone who is simultaneously crying and does not mind the combination. Marcus sent a message. "Congratulations. She is going to change things. Donovan does not know yet. I will follow your lead on whether he does." Clara replied, "He can be told. He is her father. That does not change." She held Georgia against her chest in the quiet of the hospital room and listened to the sounds of the building around them. Footsteps in the corridor, a cart wheeled past, a distant phone, the ordinary sustained hum of a place where people arrived and were changed by what happened to them there. She thought about what she would tell Georgia when Georgia was old enough to be told. She would not tell a story about victimhood. She would not tell a story about a woman who was thrown out into a storm and survived. Survival was the floor, not the ceiling. It was not the story. The story was a woman who had been given something significant and spent years trying to carry it quietly, trying to make herself small enough to be chosen, trying to have one part of her life that was not mediated by the weight of what she was, and who had finally, on a rainy Monday night, in her socks on a front porch, run out of small. The story was she walked to her car, she drove to a diner, she told the truth, she made the calls, she read every document. She walked into the room at the head of the table, and she was exactly who she had always been, without apology and without diminishment. The story was the beginning, not the survival. 5 weeks after George's birth, Clara chaired her first full public board meeting as active CEO of Callaway Whitmore Industries. The announcement had been distributed through appropriate channels a week earlier. Brief, professional, factual. Several financial publications ran brief pieces about it. One described her as a previously low-profile heiress, assuming an active leadership role. She read this once over breakfast and set it aside. She did not require anyone's framework for understanding what she was. She had her own. The Hartwell Tower development was awarded to a competing firm 6 weeks later. The selection committee's decision was based on the merits of the submitted proposals. The firm that won had presented the stronger design. Clara had not arranged this outcome. She had not made a call or sent a message or influenced the process in any direction. She had simply not intervened on Donovan's behalf, which was not the same as working against him. She had simply stopped trying to prevent her own life from fully occurring. Whitfield Design Group went through a restructuring following the Meridian contract non-renewal. Donovan was talented. Clara had never doubted that. Talent did not disappear with character failure. He would find his way back to work that mattered to him. She did not try to prevent this. She had no interest in his diminishment. His diminishment was not her story. The custody arrangement was negotiated over 3 weeks through their respective attorneys with a civility that surprised both legal teams and that Clara privately attributed to the fact that Donovan, once he understood the full landscape, had the intelligence to recognize that his interests were best served by cooperation. He would see Georgia on a schedule that reflected Georgia's needs as a young child, with a mother who was her primary parent and who had a demanding professional life. He would have the chance to be present. What he made of that chance was entirely his. On a Sunday evening in April, Clara sat at her desk in the Connecticut estate with the window open to the garden and the notebook open in front of her. The estate was quiet. Georgia was asleep in the small room 2 doors down that had been, 60 years ago, Clara's mother's room as a child. Mrs. Albright had left dinner on the counter. The library smelled the way it had always smelled. She wrote, "The prison door had been unlocked all along. I had the key the whole time. I had it at 21 when Gordon sat me down and handed me documents and said, 'Here is what you are. Here is what no one can take from you.' I filed it away. I kept it separate from my life. I told myself I was being careful. I told myself I was protecting something valuable by keeping it at a distance from my relationships, from my daily life, from my marriage. I was not being careful. I was being small, smaller than I have ever been in any other part of my life, smaller than Gordon intended, smaller than this company deserves, smaller than Georgia deserves. She will never be small. I will not teach her smallness in the name of protecting her from difficulty. I will show her the other thing, every day. What a woman looks like when she walks into every room as the fullest version of herself. No apology for the space she occupies. No performance of uncertainty she does not actually feel. No choosing the smaller version of her own story because the larger one feels like too much to claim. She will know this about her mother. She stood on a porch in wet socks in a storm, with nothing on her but a soaked dress, and 8 months of child, and the full weight of a $50 billion inheritance she had been trying for years to pretend was a comfortable trust. And she walked to her car, and she drove to a diner, and she told the truth, and she began. She closed the notebook. She sat for a while in the quiet. The garden through the open window was beginning its spring transformation. Small green things pushing up through the turned earth of the beds. The oak tree at the garden's edge just barely beginning to leaf, its branches holding the first fine haze of new growth. The morning Georgia was born, when the nurse placed her in Clara's arms for the first time and she looked into that small, focused face. Gordon's jaw, the concentrated eyes. She had felt something she had been trying to find words for ever since. Not joy exactly. though joy was part of it. Not pride, though that was there too. It was the feeling of a story finding its correct beginning. Not the porch, not the diner, not the board meeting, or the divorce papers, or the $50 billion. Those were events. The beginning was something older and quieter. It was the moment at 21 when Gordon handed her a document and said, "Here is what you are." And she had looked at it and felt the weight of it and filed it away and tried for 11 years to live as something smaller and more manageable. And then a man who did not know who she was threw her out of her own house in the rain, and she walked to her car, and she began. On a morning in early April, Clara sat in the old wicker chair in the garden with Georgia against her chest. The chair had been repaired over the winter. New weaving on the seat, the joints tightened, the frame sanded and resealed. It looked like itself again, like what it had always been before it needed attention. Georgia was awake. She studied the light coming through the new leaves of the oak tree with the particular focused intensity she had demonstrated since her first minutes in the world. Everything was interesting. Everything warranted careful examination. The world was a serious place that deserved serious attention. Bess arrived at 9 with coffee. Because Bess always arrived with coffee when it mattered, she came through the side gate from the driveway and settled into the second garden chair. The one that had always been the second chair, the visitor's chair, Bess's chair, for as long as there had been this garden and their friendship. And they sat quietly for a while and listened to the birds. After a time, Bess said, "She has Gordon's jaw." "I know," Clara said. The oak tree moved slightly in the morning air. The light shifted. Georgia tracked it with her eyes, the small, focused face tilting in the direction of the movement, studying it, purposeful, assessing. Bess said, "What is next?" Clara thought about the question seriously, because it was a serious question and Bess deserved a serious answer. What was next? A board meeting in London in 3 weeks, for which she had already read the preparatory materials twice. A new infrastructure acquisition in the Pacific Northwest that she believed in and was ready to present to the board with full supporting analysis. An apartment in the city that was being finished with care. A custody arrangement that was working, imperfectly but honestly, in the way that imperfect, honest things can work if the people in them choose to let them. What was next? Georgia. All of it was next, and Georgia was at the center of all of it. The reason the story had a correct shape now, the reason walking into rooms at the head of the table felt like something other than performance. What was next? Everything. Everything, Clara said. Bess raised her coffee cup in a small gesture that was not quite a toast and not quite a salute, but was something between the two. Something that meant yes. I see you. I have been here from the beginning, and I will be here for all of it. Georgia turned her head toward the movement of the leaves. The garden was green. The morning smelled of damp earth and coffee, and the first real warmth of spring coming through. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn mower started up and was then joined by birds and the faint sound of a radio from a neighbor's open window. Clara held her daughter and felt the weight of her. The solid, specific, entirely real weight of this child who had arrived in a storm and been named for a man who believed in permanence and who would grow up knowing, when she was old enough to know it, that her mother had stood on a porch in wet socks in the rain and had not rung her own doorbell. Had walked to the car instead. Had driven through the storm to a 24-hour diner with vinyl booths and a waitress named Darlene, who brought crackers without being asked, had told the truth, had made the calls, had read every document, had walked into every room, had begun. The door of the garden, Clara's garden, in Clara's family's house, in the history of a woman who had spent too long standing outside what was already hers, was wide open. The morning was wide open. Everything was. Editorial closing statement. The content you just listened to was researched, developed, and manually curated by our team with one purpose: to bring you stories that carry real meaning and real lessons, not just entertainment, but a mirror. Every detail in this narrative was carefully crafted to reflect experiences that are true to life, even when the story itself is fictional. We believe that the right story, told at the right moment, can change the way a person sees themselves. That is why we do this work. Thank you for being here and for listening all the way to the end. It means everything.